This build's name is 99942 APOPHIS, named after the famous asteroid, and so is the themed paint job. You can start with the build video, and then the matches are at the end. Enjoy. Hey everyone, another really fun build challenge I came up with today, and a build that I've had a lot of fun playing. This time I wanted to center a build around the Napalm launcher. So this item does not get a lot of use in PvP, and I think largely just because it does need some buffs. The projectile speed is way too slow, the firing animation is quite slow, and it just doesn't seem to really contribute against a lot of different build types, namely builds that spend a lot of time in the air, fast movers, as the projectile speed makes it all but completely unreliable unless you're point blank. But with that said, we can kind of get around that, I realized, by just making it so that the build can purge it and use the punch animation for the builds that it's weak against. So for that reason, we're going to need to run one of the melee thrust boosters, either the Kikaku or the Flugel. The Gridwalker just doesn't have enough going for it to justify it as a melee booster, even though it has pretty good melee attack thrust. Its QB cost is really penalizing for a lot of different matchups, so I did not go that way on this build. We really need faster QB reload if we're going to be dodging attacks that have like double nukes and we don't have the ability to space. So we're going to run with the Flugel in this case. Okay, so the way that the napalm is best used is to enhance your other weapons. So if you can trigger ACS Anomaly, you basically get 150% impact and a cumulative impact applied to all of your weapons. Or I should say you get a 50% multiplier added on top of the 100% it normally is. So what I realized we could do with this is we could turn a lot of weapons that are close to being instant stagger weapons and then allow them to essentially immediately stagger other opponents. So, for example, the Curtis, basically its charge attack, in terms of impact at least, ends up becoming basically a better version of the Harris, because we can shoot without overheating and fire an immediate follow-up shot. We can work in combos where we stagger with the charged Harris, hit with another weapon, and then fire another charged Harris right after. So that actually beats out the damage on the Harris. It also has a much better fire rate when we're not going for the charge attack. It's funny how when I use these non-meta items, I often have to use items that I never use otherwise, and they end up being the perfect tool that fixes the build. So in this case, it's the Curtis. We need the ability to rapidly charge up and fire those charge attacks when the moment presents itself, and we don't have time to do the slow charge up of the Harris. And importantly, it also gives us sort of reliable passive impact pressure and hit pressure against lightweights that are using the Alula because of its fire rate. It's not quite as strong as the Zimmerman, obviously, but we can use it at medium range and at close range, and it does still have that pressuring effect, and so we end up getting what we need out of it. Its ideal range at 190 means that we're going to be wanting to try to stay near the bottom end of the medium range. Like around 200, I would say, is kind of where the sweet spot is, but you can go a little bit past that depending on the builds. Ideally, though, you want to try to float around 200. That also works really well with the Majestic. One thing I can tell you can change in this build, the Majestic has an impact of 1090. So if you have if you've built up napalm on them, that basically means if you land this, it does 1635 burst impact. That's enough to stagger some of the lighter weight builds immediately. So I also really like the reliability of the Majestic. It has you'll notice this in some of the matches later, that it hits because of its proximity det, which is a little bit wider, much better than our second contender for the slot, which is the Javelin Alpha. Now, the Javelin Alpha, I really wanted it to be the dedicated slot for this build, but the unreliability against lightweights is just a really heavy penalty to pay, and also the impact doesn't actually apply all at once on the Javelin Alpha. It does like a burst amount, and then it builds up to 1390 with the rest of the explosions. But that said, if you do run this, it works really well against anything that's not a lightweight, like a super lightweight with a Lula. And if you do napalm those builds, which is the ones you will usually be napalming anyways, you're going to get a burst of 2085 impact. So even some builds like Snail, for example, like anything like those sort of frames, you essentially can immediately stagger them. And one really cool thing that this build can do is when you do get the stagger and you get your punish off, you often want to save the get the Javelin Alpha ready and get another round off right away, and then you'll just immediately stagger them again, which is awesome. Same principle is going to apply to the Javelin Beta, by the way, but before I get onto that, so essentially you can swap either or here. I really want the Javelin Alpha to work. It's just really hard in lightweight matchups because we end up purging the Napalm in those, and we can use the punches with the Flugel and the Curtis and Javelin to get the Stagger done, but and then that way we get the much better Stagger punish with the Javelin Alpha, but it is nice to have access to the Majestic, and I think the build honestly does really require the Majestic, as it is the only really reliable proximity det, fast firing animation with top end burst impact out of the bazookas and the grenade launchers. Okay, the reason for the Javelin Beta, we need a missile that helps us both in long range and in close range, and also does burst impact. So again, this one does 717 impact, but again, if we've napalmed them, that becomes a missile that does 1075. That's huge. And it also has one other really unique characteristic that we want, which is that it triggers a beep beep warning, and we can use that to I'll show you in a little bit with some of the ways I've set up the napalm now, or at least I've learned to set up the napalm, but it also sets up our Majestic. So like a lot of times people will dodge the beep beep for the missile, and then you do an immediate follow-up Majestic. It's a really confusing way where they don't have a lot of time to react, and they have to kind of make a split-second decision, decide if it's the missile or the Majestic you fired first. And so the missile just stat-wise works perfectly, and the beep-beep function is even better. The only real big downside, again, is super lightweight stack height, but we do have a medium-range weapon, which is nice, and that can put on some pressure while we close the gap, and we can use our punches to help us close the gap in certain situations as well when the assault boost is not as cost-efficient. Hal Head was basically a later on trade-off, so we'll come back to this one. The things that I did need was the Mine Beta. The reverse joints work really well with Napalm because of the jump height. It makes it really easy to position above them, and one of the best ways to Napalm opponents is to go straight up and shoot down. That way, even if they dodge it, doesn't matter, the Napalm's still burning around them, and they're still taking that ACS build-up. Also, the reverse joint kick is really strong, so we kind of want that, and the jump distance helps us to keep spacing for medium range when we're up against things like pistol builds and whatnot. Another really cool thing you can do with the napalm is shoot the ground and stay in the napalm, so that pistol builds have to contend with taking that fire build up rapidly while they're trying to like get a lock on you, and you just hop around a couple times, keep maybe 2 splashes of napalm, and the Majestic will stagger them in most cases. Arms, pretty self-explanatory. We needed good firearm spec and good melee spec, so this arm was essential. The recoil is not super high, and it is worth noting that the napalm has a really high recoil stat. Notice it's 50, and then it fires 3 salvos. So basically, when you fire the napalm, you need to pause a second before shooting either of your other missiles or other attacks, so that you don't accidentally miss due to the recoil spread. But the Majestic is tolerable at 85, and same goes for the Javelin Alpha at 80. Both of those work just fine with the recoil stat of this arm, because realistically we only need to shoot those once, and then we're shooting the Curtis, which has a pretty manageable recoil stat at 19. That's another reason we don't take the Harris, by the way. Although it would be nice to have access to that charge attack with the napalm effect, but alas, we need something more flexible. Core, we're going for lightweight and booster efficiency, as well as a short EN recharge delay as much as possible. The Hakoshi ends up putting in a lot of work here to keep our EN supply up, despite the Nox lack of standing on that stat. So I end up coming back to the head once I finished everything else. The Flugel was basically essential. We aren't like a pure melee build, so we just needed the access to the melee lunge speed of the Flugel, just for when we purge the the Kyorai for any matchups where it doesn't do anything. Talbot, again, self-explanatory. We need both close range and mid-range strong assist, as well as missile launch detection time, or lock-on time, as the Javelin Beta does have a decently long lock-on time, so we don't want to lag behind here. It is worth noting with this FCS that going into soft lock at medium range, or just before you fire the Majestic or the Javelin Alpha, is a way to enhance your FCS really briefly. It just takes some getting used to, so you just flash off the hard lock fire, flash it back on, and resume combat. The Hakoshi generator was pretty self-explanatory. We wanted decent capacity and good EN recharge delay, as well as supply efficiency for a decent weight. This one strikes a nice balance in those 3 critical stats for us. The longer EN recharge delay compared to the Ming Tang is salvageable because of our jump distance. So we can always create a bit of space, and that buys us an extra fraction of a second or so to get the EN recharge delay to kick in. After all of those decisions were made, that left me just to take the heaviest head with good scan stats that I could get away with. Good stability, good stats, good resistances, good scan distance, and good scan duration. Lastly, a really cool tech that I noticed is that when they're napalmed, your assault armor also gets enhanced. So if you use assault armor on, say, a tank using pulse armor after you staggered them, it will re-stagger them, unless they also combine it with the assault boost tech. But even still, you're getting basically 3,000 impact buildup, which is what they should honestly buff this to anyways. But I just had to run assault armor on this build for that reason. It also really works well when we're up against lightweight kites. I have this issue with a lot of builds that are weak against lightweight kites. You basically always want to run assault armor because you can't afford the second chase down when they pop pulse armor. So you just need to run assault armor and use your melee lunge to ensure you get the gap close on them. And it will cancel them out. Another really nice thing about the napalm, we're never really going to use it against most lightweight builds. There are a couple that you might, but it is worth noting that at 3,000 impact, at 3,000 impact, if they do the tech to reduce impact by, I think it's 30%, they still end up taking 2,100 impact. So a lot of those builds can even assault boost through the assault armor when they're not like a heavier mech anyways. Okay, so that basically covers all the frame parts. I'm going to jump into some clips of some combos and then the matches at the end. So play the next clip frame by frame to see how the Javelin Alpha does not apply its impact all at once, and we would prefer the Majestic for that reason in most cases. So this can lead to some annoying interactions where they can slip the stagger. Here you can see that there is enough impact there if all of it lands to stagger Snail right after a kick with no impact buildup. Here you'll see that it is not guaranteed, it actually can whiff, but even when I let the impact reset here, because of the way they're moving, it ends up slipping some of the explosions, and it's worth noting that the Majestic actually has a higher initial threshold than the Javelin Alpha in impact. Okay, so here's an unnapalmed Majestic versus a napalmed Majestic. Note the ACS anomaly doesn't last that long, so once you've hit them twice, and there's no warning either, so you really have to just know that anytime you're hitting them with napalm, it's time to like dump in with impact. But you really want to make the most of that window, especially after pulse armors and whatnot that you've cancelled. Here's a look at Carla with 2056 impact. Other thresholds that we can meet without napalm. So the kick with Javelin Alpha is strong enough to even stagger over 2,000 stability. Super handy. Here's a look at with napalm. If you ever do napalm them, try to prefer the linear rifle as your stagger option so you can stagger punished with your bazooka. So that also allows you to follow up with another charged attack. There they were blocked by the pillar, but it's worth noting that if you stagger with the linear rifle, then you get to follow up with the linear rifle because it overheats. The linear rifle is also much more reliable for those lighter weight mechs that don't need all the impact of the bazooka. So I don't think I napalmed Rusty here, but the point is just the kick followed up does enough to stagger, and I can get the bazooka. Obviously, I'm not going to try to napalm there just because with lightweights the recovery is so fast. The napalm is really going to shine against heavier builds, especially tanks and whatnot, just making your bazooka that much stronger. Again, I'm still using the Javelin Alpha here. You have a lesser version, but it's still really powerful with the Majestic at 1600 impact, so don't underestimate it. It's stronger than the regular Javelin. But I'm going to get staggers here. By now they've been napalmed, so you'll see that the Javelin Alpha right afterwards just puts in work for re-staggering as soon as they've woken up. Okay, let's look at the Purged melee combo for matchups where we don't run Napalm. If they're either aerial or super lightweights, they can dodge it. It's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to go into a triple punch. Here I cancel the pulse first. Triple punch while charging the Curtis. You can fire either the Javelin if it's off reload or the Curtis. The first one's guaranteed. The second one may not be, depending on distance and the opponent build type and recovery stats. Don't forget about the Javelin missile too. You can also fire that in between either the punches or at the very end right before you shoot the Curtis or the Javelin Alpha. So that would just look like this to me too, if you have it available. It's not always there, but when it is. And don't forget that the punches are really good Stagger starters too. You'll need those for lightweights. Okay, let's jump into some matches. It's going to be important to look at the opponent's build and realize what your big threats are and whether or not the Napalm will contribute. So Karasawa, I should mention, is unique in that its hitbox is so wide and it's an instant stagger for this build, so you need to be in the air, you should know, to QB dodge it and reverse direction. If you try to jump it on the ground, your jumping animation adds too many frames and you will not have time to evade it, depending on their FCS obviously. But there you can see it is possible to dodge. I believe the opponent's running Talbot here though, so if you do let them get too close with like a Celis or Abbott, you're looking in really dangerous territory. So it is worth noting to keep in mind that particular weakness. Alright, the next two clips are going to be lightweights, really showing how the Majestic is much more reliable and why I think it should be the default tool for this build. Basically I would only use the Javelin Alpha if you're really good at soft lock swapping before you shoot, and you're just really comfortable with the Javelin Alpha. I'm not that great with bazookas, I'm not going to lie, and so it might just be me, but I had a really hard time making that thing land even though it claims to have a proximity deck. So I would really compare the Majestic and just see what your success rate is with each of the uses and make a call for yourself. Also, the higher burst impact threshold does come up a lot. Not that it will against lightweights because you're not going to be napalming anyways, but there are some mid-weight matchups where I do kind of notice it's more reliable. Oh, and then one other note. I didn't actually realize the punch tech at the time of these two matches. I just gathered these clips over the last like 2 days, so I didn't spend a lot of time gathering them, but it is worth noting that there could be an argument that you can get even more done with the Javelin Alpha, given that we also have access to one other really strong tool against these lightweights via the Flugel Punch, had I had that epiphany before I had these two matches here. One honorable mention. So the Dizzy is also pretty interesting on this build. It kind of fills the role of both the Javelin Alpha and the Majestic. Because of its radius, we can always shoot the ground against close-range rush-down pistols. We also have the ability to snipe kites if they go into the detonation range, which I believe is right around that 230 mark. So that is interesting. We could consider it. The main reason I didn't, though, is just the slower fire rate, the slower firing animation is really risky for more maneuverable builds like this. And then secondly, the reload is quite punishing. But it is worth noting it basically has the burst impact of the Javelin Alpha's, total sustained impact, while having the ability to hit lightweights, both close range and long range, in sort of indirect ways that the Javelin Alpha did not, and that the Majestic, while better in terms of reliability, it's not like you can't do it with the Dizzy. So an honorable mention. I think you could consider this tool as well if you want, and maybe get a piece of both worlds as a middle ground. Not quite as good at either or other option at any one niche, but it has the ability to play both niches.